Well, good morning, everyone. It is 9:30. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Happy anniversary.
Thank you. I finally got to make one out of three of your classes.
Which part are you studying?
Which one do you want? It's a little bit of everything. Just FYI, we are on the potluck Bible study process. So you sort of get potluck every Sunday. We've been doing this 3-week look at death and dying. Next Sunday, I believe Dr. Meisner is doing Psalm 8, and that will be part of the next potluck. Okay. So before we do all of this, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for so many blessings that you pour upon us. You share with us the incredible good news of salvation, that we are saved by our faith, our connection to your Son, Jesus. We also thank you for the gift of the Holy Spirit that moves in our lives and enables us to share the good news of your Son, Jesus, with others. As we look at death and dying, we ask you, Lord, not only to give us the comfort of what lies ahead in our lives, but to share that comfort with those around us who don't know it or maybe are unsure, to give them the good news as well. It's in your name we pray. Amen. If you need a handout, my beautiful assistant back here is handing them out. Thank you, Carol. After 50 years, this is starting to work okay. It took some time. It's a learning process, and we're still going through it. Well, this morning, before we get into this, I decided to show you some pictures of Italy, because we got some time today. And part of it was these screens are so nice, and they're so big, and the imaging on it is so great. We were in Italy last month for a couple of weeks. We went through Rome for 4 days, Venice for 4 days, Florence a couple of days, and Siena a couple of days. We did Eurail, so that line on there is the trains that we were using in Italy. We've never done this before in terms of using Eurail. And actually, it worked great. Always before, we would just fly into some place, rent a car, and then drive around. And quite honestly, after seeing the traffic in Rome and seeing stuff all over the place, I'm glad I wasn't driving. So that was our trip. This is the happy couple launching off from over the Atlantic. This is a picture right out of our window in our apartment in Rome. We were right across the street from the Colosseum. Right across the street. The apartment was sitting right on the spot where Nero's palace was located. And the Colosseum, which I actually didn't know before the Colosseum was built, this was a lake that Nero had built that he could look out. So his view out of his palace would have been a lake. They filled it all in when they built the Colosseum. The connection back at the time of Christ, the Colosseum was built about 50 years after Jesus' ascension. And the connection in Bible times would be the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed in the year 70 AD by the Romans. And much of the marble that was in the temple in Jerusalem ended up in the Colosseum in Rome. Now, it's been stripped since, but that is sort of the connection with the Colosseum. And the Colosseum is, we were told in no uncertain terms, which I never knew before either, by our tour guide that Christians were never killed in the Colosseum. Where they did it was in the Roman Circus, which was just down the road a little ways. I was here 52 years ago, and so this trip was sort of a connection back in time for me. The Roman Forum, this is where the business would have been transacted in Rome. This would have been where Paul would have stood trial, probably in front of Nero, since he appealed to the Roman emperor. The Pantheon, This is built, they started to construct this about 20 years before the time of Jesus. It was under construction at the time of Jesus, and it was finished by the time Paul came to Rome. The Pantheon started out as a Roman temple. This looks like a painting. I mean, if you haven't been to the Pantheon, you walk into it, and it just looks like a painting. This is the actual picture. I mean, this is half of the structure. It's a Catholic church now. It's been a Catholic church for a number of centuries. This is the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. There is no reinforcement in it. It's all concrete. It's got a hole in the middle, and it does rain into the building, although there's a draft that goes up. But I always find that this is just fascinating because it looks like a picture. The happy couple at the Vatican, we went to the Vatican Museum, and of course, you have to go into St. Peter's Basilica. St. Peter's Basilica is the largest church in the world. Right there you can see some writing that's along the edge of the basilica. That writing, the letters are about 10 feet high to give a perspective on how large the building is. I think they can fit about 55,000 people in the building. It's just a rather large space. The Spanish Steps, the Trevi Fountain, we were there a couple of times. We didn't throw any coins in. So apparently that means we're not going back to Rome, right, Carol? And then we went to Venice for 4 days. St. Mark's Cathedral, the square in St. Mark's. The writer, St. Mark, is supposed to be buried here, the tomb. The Rialto Bridge, an old bridge, a lot of shops on it. The Grand Canal that travels down. The Doge Palace, which is right next to St. Mark's, so would have been similar to the mayors of Venice over the years. They would have lived in the palace here. And then this is the inside of St. Mark's, the gold domes up there. Those are all mosaics. I mean, it's just gorgeous inside of this. And we had an opportunity to go to a concert, a Vivaldi concert in one of the churches. As you can see, as I planned this trip, we got front row seats. I mean, we had really some good accommodations along the way. So this is front row seats to the Vivaldi concert. And then we went to Florence for a couple of days. This bridge, the Ponte Vecchio that goes over the Arno River, is all jewelry shops, very expensive area. Florence is known for its cathedral, for its church. It's not particularly pretty on the inside, but the outside is sort of interesting. David, of course, is what Florence is probably really noted for. I had never thought about this before, but Carol said maybe Michelangelo must have thought David was left-handed. I hadn't thought about that, but in his statue it does look like it. Carol signed us up for a cooking class in Italy, so we could make pizza and gelato. An interesting experience. We were able to make the dough from scratch. Andre, our chef, I think we had about 20-some people that were part of the cooking class in Florence. The happy bakers. You can see by the contents of those two pizzas of how different we are. After 50 years, we're getting better at understanding those differences, but this picture shows how very, very different we are in life. And then we went to Siena for a couple of days. Siena, this is the picture out of our patio on our bedroom in Siena, the old city of Siena. The cathedral in Siena is very similar to Florence, but the inside of the cathedral is gorgeous. I mean, it's just fabulous on the inside. And I found a pulpit that I would love to preach from. Maybe we could, I think it would fit. It's an incredible, incredible pulpit. I mean, he's ancient, going back to the Middle Ages. And then the El Campo, which is sort of the half-circle square in Siena. They put dirt around it, and they race horses in the fall. They get about 55,000 people shoved into this space as well. But all of the neighborhoods in Florence compete with each other in the horse races. in this square. And then, of course, the daily answer of gelato. The next picture is the most significant picture I have taken in my later years. It doesn't have anything to do with Italy. This is when we first stepped foot on Antarctica back last November. To me, travel it's a religious experience for me, to go around and to look at the world in which we live in. I mean, not just to see the beauty, but to understand just God's hand, God's fingerprints on the world in which we live. And I've become more convinced that we're alone in the universe. This planet that we live on is so unique, so special. And I remember when this was our first steps onto the continent, we happened to be by somebody who had this banner. I mean, talking about a stroke of luck. And she agreed to let us use it. But I remember and this is the connection to Bible study today, so it's coming, is that I told Carol right after this picture was taken, I said, if I would die today, I would be happy. I had come to this point, I mean, I couldn't think of anything better in life than to finally reach the seventh continent and to experience it. And it was like, what more do I really need in life? You know, you get to that point of the bucket list is full. It's done. So that connects back into death, dying, and resurrection. I really struggled this week of how to put those slides in here. I wanted to justify it somehow. So this is that 3-week mini course that we're doing dealing with death and dying. We've looked in the first week at death and the differences between secular view and the Christian view. Of course, Christian view is that death is a punishment for sin. Last week we took a look at Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book that went back to 1969, dealing with the different stages of death and grieving, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And today we're going to be looking at life beyond briefly, and then we're going to have some time for discussion. We know as Christians that is not the end. The world sees it as the end. Put somebody in the box, put them in the ground, or cremate them. It's the end. Even at the time of Jesus, there was different viewpoints within the Jewish community. You had Sadducees who operated the temple who did not believe that there was anything after death. This for them was the end. You had the Pharisees who viewed that there was life beyond, that there was going to be a life beyond the grave. That's how different even within the Jewish community. So this isn't the end. We know that death is a doorway or the gateway to the kingdom of heaven. Did you know you can walk up the stairway to heaven today? That you can go up to heaven's gate? It's in China. Tiananmen Mountain. See the hole up there? They call it Heaven's Gate. The stairway to heaven. It's 999 steps to walk up. Not on the bucket list, Carol? No, I didn't think so. I didn't think so. Do you know what's the view? What you see on the other side of this? It's a glass walkway. A couple thousand feet above the canyon. You can walk around the mountain. Wouldn't you love to do that? No escalator. It's all got to walk it. And this is the road to Heaven's Gate, the long and winding road. So where's heaven? I mean, don't we generally view heaven as being that way? I mean, we know in reality, as the space station goes around the Earth, what's above the clouds right now. But at the heart of the New Testament and the Bible verses and the Bible references that I handed out to you this morning, I mean, heaven is very clearly that away. And if you got vertigo, that may be an issue. Heaven is up there. We know that heaven exists partly because of Easter, Jesus' resurrection. But heaven, the connection to heaven up there, really goes back to the first reference that is on the sheet today from Acts 1, verses 6 through 11. It is the ascension of Jesus. Remember, 40 days after Easter, Jesus takes his disciples out to this mountain called the Mount of Olives, to the top of the hill. He's talking to them. He gives them the Great Commission at the end of Matthew 28, where it says, I want you to go out and share the message, tell everybody, and baptize them, teach them everything. And then in this section, we find out 40 days after Easter, as he gives them that marching order in verse 8, is that he is taken up into the sky. He disappears behind the clouds. And the disciples, not surprisingly, are sort of at a loss of words. I mean, this you haven't seen before. And I put in red there, 2 men stood by them in white robes. And what do they tell them? I mean, go back to Jerusalem because we got more work to do. But this Jesus that you saw ascend is coming back the same way. He's going to return. He's coming back. The story of Lazarus is an interesting story. It is probably one of the heart and core stories of eternity, of a life beyond. The story of Mary and Martha, whose brother Lazarus becomes seriously ill. I printed out the chapter for you there because there's some interesting stuff in it. Mary and Martha and Lazarus lived just outside of Jerusalem, about 2 or 3 miles east, over the hill that Jesus ascends up to, or will ascend up to. And Lazarus, and apparently Jesus is good friends with them. Lazarus gets seriously ill. They send word to Jesus that he is sick. And of course, they're assuming that when Jesus comes, he could heal him. We find out in the story, in verse 5 and 6, that Jesus decides to stay a couple of days longer before they head back to Jerusalem. And it's fascinating back down in verse 11, where Jesus is talking to his disciples, because this you sort of get this idea that death is sleep. Jesus says, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. And they confuse this, the disciples, because they're taking this stuff literally. If he's asleep, he'll wake up. Well, no, maybe not. Whoops. Let's go back to that. So if you go up to, on the second column there, verse 17, when Jesus arrived with Mary and Martha, we know the grief that evidently the women are displaying, is that we find out this is different from the raising of Jairus' daughter or the widow's son, because how long has Lazarus been dead? 4 days. 4 days. There is no idea that Lazarus might be just in a coma, or that he might just be in a deep sleep. The guy's dead. They buried him. They put him in the tomb. And the question to Mary and Martha in verse 24, or verse 23 is, you're going to see your brother again. I find it interesting because reading it through this time because of the death and dying course. In verse 24, Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. The women apparently do have this idea of the resurrection coming, that there is going to be life beyond the grave. And of course, Jesus shares, this very profound statement that we've come to embrace, where he says in verse 25, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe it, Mary and Martha? So much of faith depends on faith. At the bottom of that column then, Jesus in that moment weeps. That is the shortest Bible verse in the New Testament, verse 35, when Jesus weeps. And then in verse 39, Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, well, it's going to sort of stink when you open up the grave because he's been dead for a while. And it unfolds this fascinating story of Lazarus coming back out, and he's alive. I wish there actually would have been more details of the after the resurrection. Would you like to have heard Lazarus talk about what he went through? Gee, I thought I was dead. Now I'm back. Did he see heaven? Did he have sort of a near-death experience? Don't know. But it is sort of the model that Jesus is trying to point out here, that the dead are coming back. There will be a resurrection. Life doesn't end at the grave. That's significant. So, we know that heaven is a real place. It's a physical location, John 14. We're not clear where heaven is at. We'll get to Revelation 21, where it seems as though what's going to happen is that there'll be a new heaven and a new earth. It's interesting because we don't really know a description of heaven. I mean, it seems to be very symbolic, the description of heaven that comes into the New Testament. Generally, when heaven is described, it's not described in positive terms, it's described in the negative, what it doesn't have, which I find fascinating. There is no death, no pain, no sorrow, no tears. There is no sun and moon that needs to shine because God is present, the light of the world. There is no temple because God is there. There is no fear, no sin. It's this perfect place. And as I've contemplated over the years of what heaven must be, I mean, this is the story of the rich man is the next one that's teed up here in John 14, verses 1 through 3. I mean, it's a real place. But then we get in Luke 16, this story about the rich man and poor Lazarus. Remember, the rich man had everything. Lazarus was poor. He just wanted the scraps from the table. They both die. Lazarus goes to heaven. This is a different Lazarus now. Lazarus goes to heaven. The rich man goes to hell. This is a parable. This isn't necessarily the real story. But it's clear from the story that once judgment takes place, there is no changing sides. You go to hell, that's where you're parked. You go to heaven, that's where you're parked. What's interesting about the parable is that it sort of raises the question that how much are we aware of after you die and go to heaven? Are you aware of people that are missing? I mean, gee, George, I thought was a believer, and he's not here today. I mean, are we aware of folks who are in hell? Are we aware of surroundings? Don't really know. But it's clear from this passage that once a person dies, you're in the place that you will be for an eternity. In Revelation 21, I printed that out on page 2, and it goes over to page 3. There is this interesting picture of heaven. And we know that Revelation really is very symbolic when you dig into it, because we've covered the book of Revelation before. But Revelation 21, there's 22 chapters of Revelation. So I gave you both chapter 21 and 22. 22 is interesting because it's the end of the Bible, and what leaps out at you, I mean, I tried to underline, what leaps out at you is that Jesus is coming back soon. I mean, that is what John's feeling is when he is writing the book of Revelation. Jesus is coming soon. We need to get ready. Revelation 21 seems to be this peek that John has into heaven, where there is no temple. There is a city, and this is sort of where people get this idea physically that heaven must be gold, because it says in Revelation 21 that what John sees is this beautiful city that is made out of gold, and it is covered with jewels, precious jewels. And if you like green, apparently, that's sort of the color that emerges over heaven, this jasper color. It's a huge place. It's about 1,380 miles on each side. This is bigger than Texas. This is over 2 million, about 2 million square miles. There's symbolism in the numbers. But what it's saying is that heaven is huge. And it's different than what you're used to. And the wall that goes around heaven is high. I mean, it's in biblical terms, but if you work it out into modern measurement, it's over 200 feet high. I mean, what would be the symbolism of having a high wall around heaven? You're protected. There's nothing that can get into you over that thing. 12 gates? Sure, makes sense, 12 gates, right? The 12 apostles. You've got the 12 tribes of Israel. Numbers mean a lot in the Old Testament, or in the New Testament.
Why would you need a gate to get out of heaven?
It's the people coming in.
Oh, it's coming in.
Apparently no one can leave.
One,
Yeah, you get in. You get in, but you don't get out. And you don't want to get out, right? Because this is the beautiful place. To me, I've sort of over the years have looked at heaven, and to me it's Garden of Eden restored. It is what the Garden of Eden was intended to be. You get into Revelation 22, I printed that out for you on the handout. You get there is that throughout it, if you read this tail end chapter of the Bible, what comes out is this urgency. Jesus is coming back, and he's coming back soon. Well, now we're 2,000 years later. And we know that time in God's book isn't equivalent to what our time is. But through it, Revelation 22, 7, 12, 10, 22, 20, that's the second last verse in the New Testament, in the Bible is, surely I am coming soon, John is told by Jesus. And this sense of urgency seems to sort of spur on this idea, we've got to share the message with people who don't know it. 1 Thessalonians 4, the letter to the Thessalonians is an interesting letter because this is the letter, the first letter that Paul writes to the church of Thessalonica. And apparently they were really bothered by the resurrection because Paul is addressing it here. And he talks about it in terms of sleep. Again, I printed that. That's printed out for you on the back page, on page 4. Their thought was that people who have died and been put into the ground and buried, when the last day comes, when judgment day comes, they're going to get left behind. And Paul's got to correct that. He says, no. When the Lord returns, actually, all the people that have died are going to be brought back to life. All of them are going to be brought back to life. The judgment takes place. And they are going to join the descending Jesus. Again, this image of heaven being up there, of coming down. And Paul is talking about the archangel announcement, the trumpets blasting. And Jesus arrives, and believers joining him and taken to heaven. Paul is trying to reassure the folks at Thessalonica that no, the ones that have died will join us if we're alive on that final day. And then Matthew 24. The whole chapter actually is a peek into the end times, but I printed out here just this section about the Son of Man. The end times, I think, are sort of scary. I don't know if we're living in the end times, but I don't know if I want to be around at the bitter end. There is going to be a lot of tribulation. The sun is going to darken. I mean, some people ascribe that to sort of the world at war and the smoke sort of arise and you can't see the moon. Moon doesn't shine. But what Matthew 24 talks about here is that the signs of Jesus in the heavens will be there and that he will come where? In the clouds, up there. I mean, heaven seems to be this new heaven that's existing someplace. I know some people believe that heaven may be on earth. I don't get that impression when you really dig through the New Testament. When you're talking about end times, it does seem as though we're going to be transported someplace. And it's this beautiful, wonderful place of peace and joy and everything the Garden of Eden was. And no sin. And when and this is Mark 13. No one knows. The only person that knows is God himself, not even Jesus, the man Jesus. So you can't actually pump anybody for it. Do you really know? So the impression would be that if we really don't know when it's coming, and that's true with our own life, we don't know when death is going to arrive, is that you need to be ready. And it's not to scare people. But the urgency message is don't put this off. I mean, connect with Jesus because you're saved by your faith in Jesus. And the beautiful Bible passage that we connect with, I mean, this is one of those Bible passages that one would share with individuals of John 3:16, that God loved us so much that he sent Jesus into the world, that whoever believes has eternal life. It doesn't say how you've lived. It doesn't say what you've done, because Jesus has taken care of that. The good news at the bitter end is that if you connect with Jesus in faith, you're saved. And the model of that would be the penitent thief on the cross. They didn't pop the nails out and the penitent thief come down and show that he's a different man. It's faith in Jesus that saves. It doesn't depend on what we've done. There's a couple of resources I would share with you. Some years ago, when Aid Association for Lutherans existed, it merged with Lutheran Brotherhood, is that they gave out a book by Margaret Metzger entitled The Time to Mourn, the Time to Dance. And it talks about grief and dying and stuff. Thrivent reissued it. It's available actually on Amazon. It's an interesting book. It's a good resource. I've given actually this out to folks who are going through grief. I've got 4 copies that I found in my library. If you want these, take them, because I'm not taking them back home. Okay? These are free. If you want to buy them, you can buy them on Amazon. But please take these. And they're good resources, I think. Carol mentioned last week to me as we were driving back, there is a book that is good for individuals to talk to children about death and dying. If I Should Die, If I Should Live, by Joanne Markshausen. Her husband, who does the illustrations, was my art instructor back at Concordia St. Paul. She was an instructor there. So this book is also available on Amazon, and it's available out there in the public. So those are some of the resources that might be available. So what we've got time to do, and I believe I had said we would have time, and even got slides in there as well, is to talk a little bit. Your experiences maybe with grieving or helping others grieve, maybe the stages of dying that we talked about last week. I mean, anything related to death and dying, let's talk about it a little bit. And I've got the favorite microphone that everybody loves to talk into.
Thank you, Pastor Dave. And some of you older members will remember this, but we had an individual that came and spoke to us in the gym many years ago. He purportedly had died in a car wreck and then came back to life. Do you recall the man? I don't remember his name, but Piper.
Don Piper.
You familiar with him?
No.
Yeah, it's an amazing story.
The stories of people that sort of this near-death experience are fascinating because there is some commonality that you find in the stories.
Yeah.
I mean, the bright light, and the sense of peace and serenity.
We can bring this closer home. When Travis was 15, he died 4 times. They kept bringing him back. But when they brought him back, he didn't wake up. But I mean, everything started working again. And he finally woke up 6 hours later. No reason, just popped in. And I asked him where he was. And he said, I was in a gray place. But he said, you'll never believe who I saw. And I had to say, who'd you see? And it was Wayne's dad who had passed months before. And he said, I said, well, what'd he say? And he said, I was told to come here to be with you so you would not be afraid. And it also, it's not your time. Yeah. At least there were plans there.
Obviously.
I have a confusion about what your lesson, which is wonderful. When we die, we go straight to heaven. When Jesus comes back, we rise from the grave.
Your soul connects. I mean, if you've died before the last day,
Right.
is that on the resurrection, the physical body comes back and the soul is connected into that body.
Okay.
So heaven seems to be the physical place. So when people die, what happens? We have two parts. We have soul, we've got physical body. When you die, sort of the physical body gets put in the grave or cremated, is that your soul lives on.
Okay.
And it is this soul, because God in his pure sense is not necessarily a physical being, right? I mean, a spirit.
Right.
So it's that soul, that breath that God seems to breathe into us when we become alive. That's that breath of God that stays with you, is your essence. And at some point in time, you're going to re-meet your body.
Oh, that's cool.
Because the question to me is, what body am I going to get?
Yeah.
You know, what age? Do I get the body when I'm in my 70s, 80s?
Right.
I would sort of like a younger body.
Right.
But the reality is that it's going to be the way God intended, and who knows?
Okay. Thank you.
But it's that body and soul being rejoined together. So it sort of goes back to the purgatory. I mean, the Roman Catholic Church, the whole purgatory kind of thing. That somehow there is a holding cell, and you got to sort of, help people get to the right side. No, when you die, you're with the Lord. That's why the near-death experiences are sort of fascinating because generally, and I'm reading about folks that have gone through those experiences, it is seeing this bright light. It is in the presence of heavenly beings. It could be, it's not your time. Go back and tell. Go back and share. Hope that helps. Chad?
So two things. First of all, I know Don Piper, the guy that died and came back to life or whatever, and he and I don't get along very well together. So we had a really big argument at one point, going back and forth between the two of us about where he actually died or not. And so it was an interesting discussion because I happened to be familiar with the place where he actually had his accident and where he supposedly died and was brought back to life. Like the actual location, the physical location, was someplace that I used to be all the time. And so he had a picture of it in his book that was the wrong place as compared to where it actually happened. And I was like, hey, this is the wrong picture. This is not the right place. And so he thought that I was trying to say that it didn't happen when I was just trying to say, no, this is just a picture of the wrong place. So anyways, we had this big falling out thing in front of about 400 or 500 people. Anyway, it was a big deal. So anyways, just so you know. But the thing I was going to say, though, is my dad was a very brave man, in my opinion. Like, his whole life, he fought in the Korean War. I mean, he lived through stuff that a lot of difficult times. Right after the Great Depression is whenever he was born, and so he had to work as a child and had a hard life, kind of a thing. And he always struck me as being a brave man, like the type of person who could face anything. And yet, as death approached, he became afraid to die. And I mean, very afraid. And so I saw him face death not well, I guess is the way to, and I know he's a Christian, and there's no doubt about that in my mind. And I know where he is now. There's no doubt about that in my mind. But to see him face it poorly makes me worry, because then I think if he was one of the bravest people I've ever met and I see him face it in that manner, how am I going to face it when my time comes? Am I going to be able to stand up and face it like, you see people that face death admirably, that you see them where they're confident in what's going to happen, and there's no guarantee that we're going to have that same confidence, I don't think. Because if anybody would have ever been confident, I would have thought my dad would have been the guy, right? But he was obviously not. And so that really makes me concerned as I grow older and I see my life. I can remember seeing him as he got older and his health deteriorated and he had to deal with health issues and stuff. And I kept thinking, come on, it's not that bad, is it? Well, yeah, it was. And now I can sort of begin to see how he was going through those things in my own life, you know. And so how do we face that? I mean, to me, it's kind of important to face it well. You know, I don't want to be somebody that now. So he also had prostate cancer and had to undergo a lot of hormone therapy because of the prostate cancer. And so in his older age, he also became very emotional because of the hormone therapy he was undergoing. And so he was not an emotional person most of his life. And so that may be part of what he was experiencing as he approached death, was the emotional part of it. But still, it scares me personally to see how he had to face it. And it really worried him, you know, and he was not the type of person that I would see as being worried about something like that.
Yeah, death, I mean, as I've shared with you a couple of weeks ago, I mean, my hope would be is that I go to sleep and I die. You know, the reality is that we know a lot of people don't, that's not the way it goes. I mean, it can be incredibly a lot of pain, a lot of, discomfort. You know, how do you minister to people? You know, how do you encourage people, support individuals in their lives as they go through those kinds of things? My guess is that a lot of times, I mean, the picture of Antarctica, and using that here, is that I'm okay with dying. I don't really want to go through a lot of pain.
Right.
Because I don't think I'm going to be very good at that. And part of it is how, you know, as you talk through death and you talk through end times options that seem to be happening in people's lives, does it help a little bit? I don't know. It seems as though we don't talk a lot about death and dying because I think we try to think that we'll push it out there somehow. But it is situations where you see it's uncomfortable, it's painful, it hurts, it's dehumanizing for some. It could be incredibly painful. How do we support and connect with people that go through those kinds of experiences?
Right. And it's hard to be there and see them go through that if it's somebody you care about.
Yeah.
And he knew death was coming for some time. I mean, he went through a hospice type scenario, and, you know, so he knew for a while that he was going to die.
Yeah.
And so it was the whole approaching
Yeah.
thing that he was having a hard time.
Yep. Bill?
Mom always said, I don't really mind dying, I just don't want to be here when it happens.
yeah. That's sort of me too.
But you just went on a fantastic trip. Did you anticipate going greatly?
Did I?
Anticipate going on that trip?
Yes.
I've thought about heaven and dying, and what I end up comparing it to is my first real trip was to Hawaii. I mean, I got on, for one, it was in the makings for about a year. So I'm thinking about it, and you're anticipating it, and you're looking forward to it. Hawaii, that's got a lot of prestige. I mean, it's built up.
Yeah.
And I get on the plane, and you're flying, and I mean, all that anticipation, and you land, and it's misting. And just, I mean, rainbows, it was mystical almost. And I think, heaven, no, we haven't been there. We have a little bit of a picture about it, but we know it's this great, great place and experience. So I try and think about it like this trip I'm planning.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
But I know it's going to be great.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that I really was looking forward to Antarctica. I was really looking forward to that. That's an interesting connection. That as we talk about heaven and we talk about what's on the other side, does that become such a powerful image, such a comforting image, that it gives you the ability to actually handle maybe more of the angst that you go through to walk through the door? I don't know.
My grandmother lived to be 102. She was of sound mind. She could beat you at any game of dominoes. She prayed to be taken. She was so disgusted with the world and how things had
Yeah,
turned out.
yeah, yeah.
Had changed so much since she was a child.
Yeah. Well, the world in which you live, I mean, part of that is, I think, colors, your perspective of where you're going, that is, again, heaven is such a better place. If you think of the Garden of Eden recreated, and that's why I guess Genesis 2 and 3, well, particularly chapter 2, where Adam and Eve are created and they're put into this beautiful, beautiful setting, this ideal setting. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And how do you help people sort of grasp that's eventually what we get? And that sometimes it does come to the point where I'm okay with leaving everything behind. I mean, there's relationships, the grandkids, there's people that I hate to say goodbye to, but I'm going to something. Unimaginable joy. The anticipation of the trip. Wonder what it will be like. But if knowing on the other side, you get to see Jesus face to face.
And there's all those that have gone before that you're going to have that relationship with.
Yeah, it's the connection out there.
One of the interesting things that my sister-in-law, who's a level 1 trauma nurse, has said, working in the emergency room and seeing people that know Jesus, they know where they're going, the family knows where they're going, a level of calm versus people who don't know. And she said sometimes it's interesting when you're administering to somebody that you know is not going to make it, and the families of the people that don't know are like, let's just keep them hooked up for, or her hooked up for a little bit more time, a little bit more time. We need a little bit more time. And she said it's very fascinating and sad to see that people who know, they know where they're going, there's some peace and calm, and people that don't know are hanging on to dear life.
Yeah, fearful and worried. It doesn't mean that Christians don't go through the grief and the anxiety and the sadness, but it also is understanding what's on the other side of the wall is incredible. And how do you bring that into people's lives? And that's particularly why it's helpful, I think, to try to Jesus, so they also have that comfort of knowing what's on the other side of the wall.
One of the women that I was in a college dormitory with, in her mid to late 30s, she developed breast cancer. She's a very strong believer. She developed breast cancer and fought it for a while, but finally it got her. And I understand that when she was in the hospital just before she died, she was so excited because she was telling the staff, I'm going to see Jesus tonight, and I'm so excited I can hardly wait.
Oh,
I thought
interesting.
that was incredible.
That is incredible. And what a witness,
Yeah.
to people around that you're giving witness as you walk through the door.
I have to share that probably 5 or so years ago, I was just thinking, well, what would my life be when I turned 80? What Milton's in my life would be when I turned 80. And, will we still live in Twin Creek Farms? What will we be doing and all this stuff? And as you know, he passed away very suddenly. And I hear people say, oh, that's how I want to go in my sleep. Well, guess what? It's hell for the people left behind.
Yeah.
You never think about when you're not going to be together any longer.
Yeah.
And it's hard, but the Lord gets you through it. Your friends get you through it. Your family gets you through it. But dying suddenly may be the answer for you, but it's not the answer for your family.
Yeah, that's a good point. How did people help? How did people help you? What was the helpfulness for people when Milton died?
Well, the kids were there within 3 hours. My pastor was there before that. My two pastors, Pastor John and Pastor Kevin, were there. Before I knew it, Audrey and Stanley were there, my dear friends.
Mike and Pixie came over because we'd known them since our Savior. People were there to support me. I had a neighbor call and say, I see EMS in your yard, is everything okay? And I said, no, Milton's just died. But they call you, they check on you, they invite you to do things. But it's a whole new life.
It is.
It's hard to know what it's gonna be like.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think, I wasn't here last Sunday because I went to church at Mission Liberty Hill with my daughter, but those 5 steps that you shared were very good. And I think,
And families go through those too. The ones that are left behind tend to go through steps as well.
yeah, yes, but I think Chad's dad may have just not made it to that final step, and maybe you need time. He said he has but maybe you just need time to get through all those steps too, because, you know, when you get breast cancer or something like that, you start going through some of those steps.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something to be said about, you know, having time to say goodbye if you haven't done it yet, or content enough with where your relationships are at that if they don't wake up in the morning, I'm okay with that.
Well, we've been out with our kids, with Michelle and her family the night before, looking at Christmas decorations.
Yeah.
Went to bed at 11.
Well, my dad died like that, and I never got to say goodbye, and he was young. And it would have been nice to have a little more time, which I didn't have. I had that with my mother, but it was difficult to see her go through those final stages in ovarian cancer. And I have to say that it's a very selfish thing on my part of wanting to go to sleep and die, because quite honestly, I don't want the pain. And I think, as I shared with you a couple weeks ago, that's not necessarily how my life does go. There's things I would wish they would happen this way, and quite often they do not. So it's whatever the Lord is going to take you through, I guess.
This is the humor in the night before. As I said, we were out with Michelle and Clay and their family going around and looking at Christmas lights. And we had gone to in South Austin, the place where they had won the national greatest Christmas display.
Yeah, Mozart's.
Oh, no, not Mozart's. It was the place, the house that had won the greatest Christmas. I can't think of it. I can't think of it. I don't think it's Grunwald's, but anyway, something along that line. And of course, this was during COVID. And we were there, and there were some people taking, group pictures, and they had their mask on. And Milton was laughing. He said, in a few years, they won't even know who those people are. And so every once in a while, Michelle and Clay will come up, and they will laugh. It'll come to mind, Milton's comments that night, because he did have some humor in there with his laugh.
And it's good. I mean, when people die, I mean, it's good to have the memories, right? I mean, that's part of the joy here, is the memories, the relationships. So it makes, saying goodbye, for this temporary moment in time, knowing that actually there is a heaven. People are better off there.
My first husband died, and he had gone on a business trip, and he was in Israel. And he was only 48 years old. But he had told his grandmother when he was about in his 20s, he said, I won't live to be 50 probably. But the thing is, I had 4 children, and it was very sudden. He died instantly. And the thing that got me through it is that naturally I am a Christian, but I really believed that it said that the hairs in your head is numbered. And when it's your time to go, no matter where you are, you will go. And I had that in my mind all the time once I realized he's gone, that no matter where we are, that when it's your time to go, you're going to go. So you have to accept that with when you lose a loved one. And so, and then he came along 3 years later, and I've had a wonderful life. But you just never know, what's going to happen.
Yeah, it is sort of the reality, I guess, of human experience, is that and I guess part of that is where the Christian experience comes into play, is to understand, and it's one of the reasons that, sermons, preaching, teaching, Bible study, all that stuff is a reinforcement of the fact that we really don't know what's around the corner. You can be afraid of that. And quite honestly, there may be some real dangers and issues that one's going to face, but we're in God's hands. He'll take us through it. And what is ultimately it all about? I want you with me. At some point in time, you're going to be with me. And I think, to talk about that more in people's lives, I think can be helpful. We never talked about death at home. I wish we would have. I mean, it would have been nice. But more of those conversations, how do you, in some respects, appreciate what you got right now? I mean, the joy of relationships that you experience, connections that we've got. Sure, we go through a lot of ups and downs and a lot of misery but we're here to support each other. And I think it becomes so important. I mean, like with as Peggy, what you're saying, it's true that when it happens suddenly, there is no more time. That's done. Yeah, my dad was 44 when he died. When I got the call in college that Dad had died, it wasn't a huge surprise. I was really disappointed because we were starting to connect together, and I wish I would have had more time. There's a lot of regrets I've got in my life that I didn't take advantage of some of the moments that I probably had, because you always assume we got more time, and then it runs out, and then you feel guilty. It was an emptiness. I have to say that the death of significant people in my lives, I remember from year to year, especially on the anniversaries, and especially if they're around holidays. I think that's really difficult because my dad died on the 11th of December. And it's Christmas time. Every Christmas time that rolls around, I remember him dying. And I wish you were here. But I have two parents that were believers. They're there. I'm happy with that. But it makes you also, I think, more appreciative of the relationships that you've got right now. Do we value people more, care for them, love them? Are we there with them? Because tomorrow may not come for any of us. And I think that this is that ongoing need in death and dying to talk about these things, before we don't have that opportunity. Appreciate what we've got right now, because it could change tomorrow.
Regarding life support, I look at that as you being the only thing between that person and heaven. Why would you want to be in that position?
I wouldn't want to be. But it is the human side of this, isn't it? We don't want to see somebody go. Yeah, well, yes, I've heard it described as being very selfish. And yet sometimes people recover. When do you pull the plug?
Very quickly, I don't mean that, I'm a loud talker. A lot of people here knew my sister Marcia. She battled breast cancer for 30 plus years. And then
The blessings of technology. The blessings of technology. I couldn't have done that years ago. Thanks for sharing. We could spend a lot more time talking about a variety of things in people's lives dealing with death and dying. Probably could have a much longer course, but these are the only 3 weeks I'm available. I hope this was helpful. We have an opportunity to be able to connect with people when they go through grieving, when there is the loss of a loved one, our own losses that we go through, and how we navigate through those. Always, it's a reminder. Heaven's our home. It doesn't depend on how good we are. It doesn't depend on what we've done. Always keep that in mind, because I think that's part of on the Christian side that people get scared of. I hope I make it. No, you'll make it. You'll get there because you believe in Jesus as your Lord and Savior. It doesn't depend on you. It depends on what he has done for you. Let's close with prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity of sharing, of talking through this whole topic of death and dying. It's an uncomfortable one in many respects, and yet there's great joy to Christians of knowing what lies ahead. We ask you to lift us up in our own faith, to hold your hand tighter as we experience life, to enjoy it, to connect with people, and to help others as they transition with you to heaven, and to help others who don't know you to understand you so that they can transition into heaven as well. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Thank you. And there's some people have already got it. Oh, there's one more book up here, and please take it.